The stars looked different from this far away from Earth. Ho stood by the window of the spaceship and watched them pass by like tiny drops of light. He had traveled for 6 months to reach this place. Now, the ship called Horizon was finally close to the... Ho was not a soldier. He was not a scientist. He was just a simple man who loved his culture and wanted to share it with others. Back on Earth, he had worked as a teacher. He taught children about Korean history, music, and art. When the government asked for someone to join the diplomatic team, nobody expected them to choose him. "Why me?" he had asked the officials. "Because," they said, "we need someone who understands the human heart." Ho did not fully understand what they meant, but he packed his bags, said goodbye to his mother, and boarded the ship. Now, looking at the alien planet growing larger in the window, he felt very small. The Empire was powerful beyond imagination. They controlled over 200 star systems. Their technology was 1,000 years ahead of anything humans had. Their ships could cross galaxies in days. Their weapons could destroy entire planets. And humans had only just learned to travel between stars. They were like children walking into a room full of giants. The ship's captain, a tall woman named, walked up beside him. She looked tired. The journey had been long and the pressure was heavy on her shoulders. "We arrive in 1 hour," she said. "Are you ready?" Ho smiled softly. "I don't think anyone can be ready for something like this." Nodded. She understood. This mission was almost impossible. They had never shown interest in humans before. They saw Earth as a small, unimportant rock in a distant corner of the galaxy. The only reason they agreed to meet was because humans had begged for months. "Just remember," said, "we need this alliance. Without protection, the other empires will crush us. We are too weak to survive alone." Ho knew this was true. In the galaxy, power meant everything. Species that could not defend themselves were conquered, enslaved, or destroyed. Humanity needed friends. They needed but they did not need humanity. The ship landed on a platform made of white stone. That was beautiful in a strange way. Everything was clean and perfect. The buildings were tall and made of smooth metal. The streets were wide and empty. There were no trees, no flowers, no birds, just cold, perfect order. Ho stepped off the ship with the rest of the team. There were 5 of them in total, led the group. Behind her walked 2 scientists and 1 military officer. Ho walked at the back, carrying a small bag over his shoulder. Waiting for them was a commander. His name was, and he was tall and thin, with silver skin and eyes that had no pupils. When he looked at the humans, his face showed nothing. No welcome, no curiosity, nothing. "You are the Earth delegation," said. His voice was flat and cold. "Yes," replied. "We are honored to be here. Thank you for receiving us." Did not respond to her thanks. He simply turned and began walking. "Follow me. The Queen has granted you 5 minutes of her time." 5 minutes. Ho felt his heart sink. They had traveled for 6 months, crossed half the galaxy, and the Queen would only give them 5 minutes. It was an insult. A clear message that humans were not worth her attention. But they had no choice. They followed through the empty streets toward the palace. The palace was the largest building Ho had ever seen. It rose into the sky like a mountain made of glass and metal. Inside, the halls were wide and silent. Their footsteps echoed on the floor. There was no decoration anywhere. No paintings, no statues, no colors, just white walls and cold light. Ho looked around and felt something strange in his chest. The palace was beautiful, yes, but it felt empty. It felt dead. There was no warmth here, no life. "This place," he whispered to himself, "has no soul." They reached a great hall. At the end of the hall sat a throne, and on that throne sat Queen. She was ancient. Ho could feel it just by looking at her. She had ruled this empire for 800 years. Her skin was pale silver like polished stone. Her eyes were deep and dark like looking into space itself. She did not move as the humans approached. She did not blink. She barely seemed alive. Around her stood dozens of officials and guards. They all watched the humans with the same empty expressions. Bowed deeply. Your Majesty, we are honored to stand before you. Earth sends its greetings and hopes for friendship between our peoples. Queen said nothing for a long moment. Then slowly she spoke. Her voice was quiet but filled the entire hall. Friendship, she repeated. An interesting word. Tell me, humans, what do you offer? Stepped forward and began her presentation. She talked about technology exchanges, trade agreements, and mining rights. She offered Earth's loyalty and promised that humans would be good allies. The Queen listened without expression. When finished, silence filled the hall. Then the Queen spoke again. Your technology is primitive, your resources are limited, your species is young and fragile. She paused. You have nothing we require. The words hit the humans like a cold wind. Ho saw shoulders fall. The scientists looked at the floor. The military officer clenched his fists. You may leave, the Queen said. This audience is over. The guards began to escort the humans out. Ho walked with heavy steps, his mind racing. This could not be the end. There had to be something, some way to reach these people. As he walked, he looked around the palace one more time. No art, no music, no warmth. Everything was perfect, but everything was empty. And then a question formed in his mind, a simple question that would change everything. He stopped walking. A guard pushed him forward, but he turned to look at a young scholar standing nearby. Her name, he would later learn, was Aura. Excuse me, Ho said softly, I have a question. Aura looked at him with curiosity. It was the first real expression he had seen on a face. Your queen, Ho asked, does she have anything that makes her happy? Aura stared at him. The question seemed to confuse her deeply. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. Happy, she repeated, as if she had never heard the word before. And in that moment, Ho understood something important, something that would guide everything he did next. These people had everything, power, technology, immortality, but they had forgotten how to feel. And maybe, just maybe, that was something a simple human could help them remember. The human delegation returned to their ship in silence. Nobody spoke. The weight of their failure hung heavy in the air. They had come so far, hoped for so much, and received nothing but cold rejection. Captain sat in the meeting room with her head in her hands. The scientists whispered to each other in worried voices. The military officer, a stern man named Dongwu, paced back and forth with anger on his face. 5 minutes, Dongwu said bitterly. They gave us 5 minutes and then threw us away like garbage. What did you expect? One of the scientists replied. We are nothing to them, insects. They have no reason to help us. Looked up, her eyes were tired. We have to try again. We cannot go back to Earth with nothing. Too many lives depend on this alliance. Try again with what? Dongwu asked. We offered them everything we have. Our best technology, our resources, our loyalty. They laughed at us. Ho sat quietly in the corner, listening. He had not spoken since they left the palace. His mind was still thinking about the scholar and her confused face when he asked about happiness. Maybe, Ho said slowly, we are offering the wrong things. Everyone turned to look at him. Dongwu frowned. What do you mean? Ho stood up. They have everything, better technology than us, more resources, more power. We cannot impress them with things they already have. Then what do you suggest? Asked. Ho walked to the window and looked out at the cold, perfect city. When I was in the palace, I noticed something strange. There was no art, no music, no decoration. Everything was clean and efficient, but it felt empty. The scientists exchanged confused looks. Dongwu shook his head. So what? They don't like decorations. That doesn't help us. No, listen, Ho continued. I asked one of them a simple question. I asked if the queen had anything that made her happy, and they did not understand. She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Leaned forward. What are you saying? I am saying, Ho replied, that maybe these people have forgotten something important, something that we still have. The room fell silent. Nobody understood what Ho meant, but something in his words made them stop and think. The next morning, Ho asked permission to leave the ship alone, was worried, but she agreed. Be careful, she warned. We don't know how they will treat you. Ho walked through the city by himself. The streets were still empty and quiet. The few he saw ignored him completely. He was just a small human, not worth their attention. But he kept walking until he found what he was looking for. A large building with the symbol of knowledge above its door. A library or something like it. Inside he found Aura, the young scholar from the palace. She was reading from a glowing screen, her silver fingers moving quickly over the text. When she saw Ho, she stopped. You, she said, the human who asked the strange question. Ho bowed politely. Yes, I hope I did not offend you. Aura tilted her head. Offend? No, but you confused me. I have been thinking about your question since yesterday. And did you find an answer? Aura was silent for a moment. No, she admitted. I do not understand what happiness means. The word exists in our language, but we do not use it. It is like asking about a color that no one can see. Ho sat down across from her. May I ask you more questions? Aura nodded slowly. She seemed curious about this strange little human who asked such unusual things. For the next several hours, Ho talked with Aura about her people. He learned many things, and each thing he learned made his heart heavier. They had evolved beyond emotion thousands of years ago. They decided that feelings were inefficient. Love made people irrational. Sadness made them weak. Joy made them distracted. So they removed these things from their minds. Now lived by pure logic, they made decisions based on facts and numbers. They did not celebrate birthdays. They did not mourn the dead. They did not laugh or cry or dream. But what about art? Ho asked. Music, stories. Aura shook her head. We had these things once long ago, but they served no practical purpose. They were eliminated. Eliminated, Ho repeated softly. The word hurt to hear. Your species still has these things? Aura asked. Yes, Ho said. We have paintings and songs and dances. We tell stories to our children. We celebrate when good things happen and cry when bad things happen. Why? Aura asked. What is the purpose? Ho thought carefully about his answer. There is no purpose, he said finally. That is the point. We do these things not because they are useful, but because they make us feel alive. They give meaning to our existence. Aura stared at him for a long time. Meaning, she repeated, another word we do not use. That night, Ho returned to the ship with a plan forming in his mind. The other delegates were preparing to leave. They had given up hope. We cannot stay here forever, said. The Queen has rejected us. It is over. Wait, Ho said. Let me try one more thing. What can you possibly do? Dongwu asked. You are not a diplomat, you are not a scientist, you have nothing to offer them. Ho smiled sadly. Maybe I have the one thing they truly need. He went to his small room on the ship and opened his bag. Inside, wrapped carefully in cloth, was a small wooden box. He had brought it from Earth, a piece of home to keep him company on the long journey. He opened the box and looked at what was inside. It was simple, small, worthless by any practical measure. But as he looked at it, he knew it was exactly what the Queen needed. The next day, Ho sent a message to the palace. He requested another audience with Queen. He expected to be ignored or rejected. But to everyone's surprise, the Queen agreed. Why? Asked confused. Why would she see us again? Commander delivered the Queen's response himself. His face showed something that might have been curiosity. The Queen wishes to know why the human asked about happiness. She finds it interesting. Ho nodded. Please tell Her Majesty that I will come alone, and I will bring her a gift. Looked at the small wooden box in Ho's hands. What is that? Something simple, Ho replied. Something your people have forgotten. Did not understand, but he delivered the message to the queen. And so the next morning Ho walked to the palace alone. He carried no technology, no treaties, no promises of trade, just a small wooden box and a heart full of hope. The fate of humanity rested on what would happen next. Before going to meet the queen, Ho spent one more day with Aura. He needed to understand the better. He needed to know what had happened to their souls. They met in a quiet garden behind the library. It was not really a garden in the human sense. There were no flowers or grass, just geometric patterns made of stone and metal, beautiful in its own way but cold, so very cold. Aura sat on a bench and watched Ho with her deep, dark eyes. "You came back," she said. "Most humans would have run away by now." "I am not running," Ho replied. "I am trying to understand." "Understand what?" Ho sat down beside her. "You, your people, how you became this way." Aura was silent for a moment. Then she began to speak, and her words painted a picture of a tragedy that stretched back thousands of years. Long ago, they were different. They were like humans in many ways. They loved and fought and created beautiful things. They wrote poetry and composed music. They fell in love and raised families. They laughed at jokes and cried at funerals. But then came the great wars. For centuries, they fought against other species. Billions died. Entire planets were destroyed. The suffering was beyond imagination. And through it all, emotion was the enemy. Fear made soldiers hesitate. Love made leaders weak. Grief made people give up. They realized that their feelings were killing them. So they made a choice, a terrible choice. Their scientists developed a way to suppress emotion. At first, it was voluntary. Soldiers took treatments to become fearless. Leaders modified their minds to remove doubt. Over time, the practice spread to everyone. Within a few generations, they had changed completely. They became calm, logical, and efficient. They won their wars. They built their empire. They became the most powerful species in the galaxy. But they paid a price. "We forgot how to feel," Aura said quietly. "We forgot what joy was, what love was, what it meant to care about something beyond logic and survival." Ho listened with tears forming in his eyes. "That is the saddest thing I have ever heard." Aura tilted her head. "Sad? I do not feel sadness, I only know the facts." "But don't you miss it?" Ho asked. "Don't you wish you could feel again?" Aura considered the question. "I do not know what I would be missing. I have never experienced these things you describe. None of us have for thousands of years." She paused. "But sometimes when I read the old texts from before the change, I wonder what it was like to feel, to truly live." Ho reached out and gently touched her hand. Aura looked down at his fingers on her silver skin. Such a simple gesture, but she had never experienced anything like it. "What is this?" she asked. "Comfort," Ho said. "When humans are sad or confused, we touch each other. It helps us feel less alone." Aura stared at their hands for a long moment. Something flickered in her eyes. Not emotion, not quite, but something. A shadow of something that had been buried for. "Tell me about your world," she said suddenly. "Tell me about Earth." And so Ho told her. He told her about spring in Korea, when the cherry blossoms covered the streets in pink and white. He told her about summer festivals, where people danced and ate food and watched fireworks light up the sky. He told her about autumn, when families gathered to share meals and give thanks. He told her about winter, when children played in the snow and parents told stories by warm fires. He told her about weddings, where two people promised to love each other forever. He told her about funerals, where communities came together to mourn and remember. He told her about birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesday evenings when friends shared laughter over dinner. Aura listened to every word. She did not understand most of what he described, but she kept listening anyway. "Your species wastes so much time and energy on these things," she said finally. You could be so much more efficient if you removed emotion like we did." "Maybe," Ho admitted, "but we would rather live short, messy lives full of feeling than long, empty lives without it." "Why?" Ho smiled. "Because without feeling, what is the point of living at all? You can exist for 1,000 years, but if you never love anyone, never laugh at a joke, never cry at a beautiful sunset, have you really lived? Or have you just survived?" Aura had no answer to this question. That night Ho walked back to his ship under the cold stars. His mind was made up. He knew what he had to do tomorrow. The Queen had ruled for 800 years. She had conquered worlds, made alliances, and built an empire. She had everything a person could want. But she had never felt joy, never felt love, never experienced the simple pleasure of receiving a gift from someone who cared. Ho could not offer her technology or power. He was just a simple teacher from a small planet. But he could offer her something that no one had given her in 8 centuries. He could offer her a reason to feel. The wooden box sat on his desk, waiting. Inside was something small and fragile, something that would seem worthless to anyone who looked at it with logical eyes. But Ho was betting everything on the hope that somewhere, deep inside the Queen's ancient heart, there was still a part of her that remembered what it meant to feel. Tomorrow, he would find out if he was right. He lay down on his small bed and closed his eyes. Sleep did not come easily. His mind kept returning to Aura and her questions, to the empty beauty of this world, to the tragedy of a species that had everything except the thing that mattered most. When morning came, Ho dressed in simple clothes. He picked up the wooden box and held it close to his chest. "Please," he whispered to no one in particular, "let this work." Then he walked out of the ship and toward the palace, carrying the weight of humanity's future in his hands. The palace was even more silent than before. Ho's footsteps echoed through the empty halls as Commander led him toward the throne room. The sound seemed too loud in this place where nothing ever made noise. "The Queen has given you 3 minutes," said without looking back. "Do not waste her time." "I will not," Ho replied quietly. Stopped walking and turned to face him. For the first time there was something in the commander's eyes, not emotion but curiosity. "What is in the box?" Ho held it closer to his chest. "Something for the Queen. Our scanners show it contains no technology, no weapons, no valuable materials." His voice held a hint of confusion. "It appears to be organic matter, dead plant material." "Yes," Ho said simply. Stared at him for a long moment. "You are a strange creature, human. You come to our empire with nothing of value, and yet you act as if you carry something important." Ho smiled softly. "Value is not always measured by power or technology." Did not understand. He turned and continued walking. They entered the throne room. It was filled with officials just like before. Dozens of silver faces watched Ho with empty expressions. Among them, he spotted Aura standing near the back. She gave him a small nod, which meant more than any greeting he had received since arriving. And there, on the throne at the end of the hall, sat Queen. She had not changed at all since the first meeting. She sat perfectly still, her ancient eyes fixed on the small human walking toward her. 800 years of life looked back at him. 800 years of power, of conquest, of cold, logical thought. Ho stopped at the proper distance and bowed deeply. "You may rise," the Queen said. Her voice filled the hall like water filling a glass. "I have granted you this audience because your question interested me. You asked about happiness." "Yes, Your Majesty." "None of my subjects have asked such a question in centuries." The Queen's dark eyes studied him carefully. "Explain yourself." Ho took a deep breath. This was the moment. Everything depended on what he said next. "Your Majesty," he began, "when I first entered your palace, I was amazed by its beauty. Your technology is beyond anything we have on Earth. Your empire spans 200 star systems. You have achieved things that humans can only dream of." The queen listened without expression. But Ho continued, "I also noticed something missing. There was no art on your walls, no music in your halls, no decoration or color or warmth." He paused. "Your palace is beautiful, but it felt empty, like a body without a soul." A few of the officials shifted uncomfortably. Commander's hand moved toward his weapon. No one spoke to the queen this way. The queen raised her hand slightly, and everyone fell still. "Continue," she said. "I spoke with one of your scholars," Ho said, glancing at Aura. "She told me about your history, about how your people removed emotion to survive the Great Wars. I understand why you did it. I truly do. But I believe you lost something precious in the process." "And what is that?" the queen asked. Ho stepped forward slowly. "The ability to feel joy, to love, to find meaning in things that have no practical purpose." He lifted the wooden box. "Your Majesty, I am not a diplomat or a scientist. I have no technology to offer you, no treaties or trade agreements. I am just a simple teacher from a small planet." He opened the box. Inside, resting on a bed of soft cloth, was a single flower. It was dried and pressed flat, but its petals still held their shape, pink and purple and delicate, like a piece of captured sunset. The court fell completely silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. "This is called," Ho said softly. "In my language it means eternal flower. It is the national flower of my country. My mother grew them in our garden when I was a child. When I left Earth, she gave me this one to remember her by." He walked closer to the throne, holding the flower out before him. "On Earth, we give flowers to people we wish to honor, not because flowers are useful. They cannot power ships or win battles. They cannot feed you or protect you. They exist only to be beautiful." The queen stared at the flower. She did not move. "That is what makes them precious," Ho continued. "They have no purpose except to remind us that some things matter simply because they do. Beauty for the sake of beauty, love for the sake of love, joy for the sake of joy." He stopped at the base of the throne and knelt, holding the flower up toward the queen. "Your Majesty, I offer you this gift. It is small and fragile and worthless by any logical measure, but it comes from my heart, and I give it to you with the hope that somewhere, deep inside, you still remember what it feels like to receive something given with love." The hall was silent. No one breathed. Every eye was fixed on the ancient queen and the tiny human kneeling before her. Queen looked down at the flower. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, she reached out her hand. Her fingers trembled. Commander stepped forward in alarm. The queen's hands had not trembled in centuries. "Your Majesty, are you?" "Silence," the queen whispered. Her silver fingers touched the delicate petals of the flower. She lifted it carefully, as if it were made of glass. She brought it close to her face and looked at it with her ancient, dark eyes. And something changed. It was small at first, a slight shift in her expression, a softening around her eyes, but it grew. Like a crack spreading through ice, something was breaking open inside the queen. The entire court felt it. They were telepathically connected to their ruler, and suddenly, for the first time in 800 years, they felt something flowing through that connection. Emotion. The queen was feeling. She stared at the flower, and memories that had been buried for centuries began to surface. A time before the wars. A time before the change. A time when her people laughed and cried and loved. A single tear formed in her eye. It rolled down her silver cheek and fell onto the throne. The first tear she had cried in 800 years. Commander stumbled backward. Officials throughout the hall grabbed their heads, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar sensations flowing through the telepathic network. Aura stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock. "What is this?" the queen whispered, her voice breaking. "What is this feeling?" Ho looked up at her with gentle eyes. "It is many things, Your Majesty. Wonder, gratitude, perhaps even a little sadness. They are all connected. They are all part of being alive. The queen held the flower against her chest, cradling it like a precious child. More tears fell from her eyes. She did not try to stop them. "I had forgotten," she said softly. "I had forgotten what this was like." Ho stood up slowly. "You never truly forgot, Your Majesty. You just buried it very deep, but it was always there waiting." The queen looked at him with new eyes. Not the eyes of a cold empress, but the eyes of someone who had just woken up from a very long sleep. "Who are you?" she asked. Ho smiled. "Just a human, nothing more." The queen shook her head slowly. "No, you are much more than that." She looked at the flower again, and a small smile touched her lips, the first smile in 8 centuries. "You have given me something I did not know I was missing." She looked up at Commander, who was still reeling from the emotional wave. "Prepare quarters for this human," she commanded. "He will stay here, not as a diplomat but as a guest, as a teacher." Struggled to find his voice. "Your Majesty, I must protest." "There is no protest," the queen said firmly. "For the first time in 800 years I feel alive, and I want to know more." She looked at Ho with something that might have been hope. "Teach me," she said. "Teach us all." The news spread through the empire like fire through dry grass. The queen had cried, the queen had smiled, the queen had felt. For thousands of years, had believed emotion was weakness. They had built their entire civilization on the foundation of logic and control. And now, in a single moment, everything they believed was shaking. Many were frightened. If the queen could feel, did that mean they could too? And if they could feel, what did that mean for their society, for their power, for everything they had built? Commander was among the most frightened. He stood in the corridor outside the queen's chambers, his silver hands clenched into fists. He had served for 300 years. He had never seen her show any sign of weakness. And now, because of one small human, she was changing. "This is dangerous," he muttered to himself. "This human has done something to her, some kind of weapon, some kind of trick." But deep inside, knew that was not true. He had felt it himself through the telepathic connection. What the queen experienced was real, and it had awakened something in him too, something he had spent his entire life suppressing. He did not like it at all. Meanwhile, Ho was given a room in the palace. It was small but comfortable, with a window that looked out over the endless silver city. Captain and the rest of the human delegation were allowed to stay as well, though they were still confused about what had happened. "I don't understand," said, sitting across from Ho in his room. "You gave her a flower and now we're guests of honor. How is that possible?" Ho looked out the window. "I gave her something she didn't know she needed, something her people abandoned long ago." "A flower?" "No," Ho turned to face her, "a feeling." That evening, Queen summoned Ho to her private chambers. It was the first time any outsider had been invited to such a place in centuries. The queen sat by a window, holding the pressed flower in her hands. She had not let it go since receiving it. She looked at it constantly, as if afraid it might disappear. "Sit with me," she said when Ho entered. He sat in a chair across from her. The room was sparse, like everything in the palace, but there was something different about it now. A warmth that had not been there before. "I have been alive for 800 years, the queen said softly. "I have conquered worlds. I have made treaties that shaped the galaxy. I have done things that will be remembered for." She looked up at him. "And yet this small flower has affected me more than any of those things." "Why do you think that is?" Ho asked. The queen was silent for a long moment. "Because none of those things were given with love. They were transactions, calculations, moves in an endless game of power." She touched the flower's petals gently. "But this was different. You gave me something that had value to you, something personal, something that meant nothing in terms of power but everything in terms of, what did you call it?" "Meaning," Ho said. "Yes, meaning." The queen closed her eyes. "I had forgotten that word. I had forgotten so many words: joy, sorrow, hope, love. They were just symbols in our language, empty of substance. But now, she opened her eyes and Ho saw something new in them. Life. Now I am beginning to understand what they mean. Over the following days, strange things began to happen throughout the empire. It started with the queen. She began asking questions she had never asked before. What made people happy on other worlds? What did other species do for joy? Why did beings create art and music? She called scholars and historians to her court and asked them to find records from before the Great Change. Old texts that had been locked away were brought out and studied. And as she learned, she shared. Through the telepathic network that connected all, she sent out ripples of what she was experiencing. Not commands or information, but feelings. Raw, unfamiliar, overwhelming feelings. The effect was profound. Young, who had never experienced emotion before, suddenly found themselves curious about strange things. They looked at the stars and wondered what lay beyond. They looked at each other and wondered what it would be like to truly connect. Aura was one of the first to approach Ho after the awakening began. She found him in the garden where they had first talked, sitting on the stone bench and looking at the sky. "Something is happening to me," she said. "I do not understand it." Ho looked at her. "Tell me." Aura sat beside him, her movements uncertain in a way they had never been before. "I was reading an old poem yesterday, something written before the change. It described a sunset over an ocean. I have never seen an ocean. I did not think the poem would affect me." She paused. "But as I read it, something happened in my chest. A tightening, a warmth. My eyes produced moisture without any irritation or injury." Ho smiled gently. "You were moved. The poem made you feel something. The tightening was emotion. The moisture was tears." "Tears," Aura repeated. "I have seen the Queen's tears. I did not expect to produce my own." She looked at Ho with something like wonder. "Is this what you feel all the time? This fullness, this aliveness?" "Not all the time," Ho admitted. "Feelings come and go. Sometimes we feel happy, sometimes sad, sometimes nothing at all. But yes, this is what it means to be human, to feel the world, not just see it." Aura was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised him. "Thank you." "For what?" "For waking us up." She looked out at the Silver City. "I have lived for 200 years, and I am just now beginning to truly live." But not everyone was grateful. Commander gathered a group of officials who shared his concerns. They met in secret, away from the telepathic reach of the Queen. "This cannot continue," said, his voice hard. "The human has infected our Queen with some kind of emotional virus. It is spreading through the Empire. If we do not stop it, everything we have built will crumble." "What do you suggest?" asked one of the officials. His eyes were cold. "Remove the source, remove the human." But before they could act, the Queen summoned them all to court. She stood before them, the flower still in her hand, and looked at each of them in turn. "I know there are those who fear what is happening," she said. "I know there are those who see emotion as weakness, as infection, as disease." Her voice grew stronger. "I was once one of you. For 800 years I believed that feeling was the enemy of power." She held up the flower. "But this small, fragile thing taught me something important. Our ancestors removed emotion to survive the great wars. It was necessary then, but the wars are over. We have built an empire that spans the galaxy. We have nothing left to fear." She looked at, and her eyes were not angry but sad. "Except ourselves. We have become so afraid of feeling that we have forgotten how to live. We exist, but we do not live. We survive, but we do not flourish. We have power, but we have no purpose." She stepped down from her throne and walked among her people, something she had not done in centuries. "I do not want to go back to what I was," she said softly. "Cold, empty, alone. I want to feel. I want to laugh and cry and wonder. I want to live the years I have left, not just endure them." She turned to face them all. And I want the same for all of you." The hall was silent. Commander stood frozen, his plans crumbling around him. He had expected the Queen to be ashamed of her emotions. He had expected her to fight against them. He had not expected her to embrace them. And somewhere, deep inside his own cold heart, he felt a tiny crack begin to form. Months passed, and the Empire began to change in ways no one could have predicted. Ho became a teacher just as the Queen had asked, but he did not teach technology or strategy. He taught humanity. He taught what it meant to feel, to care, to find meaning in the small things. At first, his students were few. The Queen attended every lesson, sitting quietly and listening with her ancient eyes full of new light. Aura came as well, along with a handful of other young scholars who were curious about this strange human knowledge. But word spread. Through the telepathic network, echoes of what Ho taught rippled across the Empire. More came to listen, then more still. Ho taught them about music. He brought recordings from Earth, songs in languages they had never heard. He played them a gentle melody his mother used to sing to him as a child. The first time they heard it, many of them cried without understanding why. "This is what your ancestors gave up," Ho explained. "The ability to be moved by beauty, to feel joy without reason, to connect with something greater than yourself through nothing more than sound." He taught them about stories. He told them tales from Korean folklore, about clever rabbits and foolish tigers, about love that lasted beyond death, about heroes who sacrificed everything for others. They had databases full of information, but they had no stories. They had forgotten that truth could be found in fiction. He taught them about family. On Earth, he explained, people belonged to each other. Parents loved their children. Siblings protected each other. Friends became as close as blood. They had efficient reproductive systems and education centers, but they had no families. Children were raised by the state, taught to value logic above all else. Queen listened to this lesson with particular intensity. "I have ruled for 800 years, she said afterward when she and Ho were alone. "I have had hundreds of children, biologically speaking, but I never knew them. They were taken from me at birth and raised in the education centers. I never held them, never sang to them, never watched them grow." There was deep sorrow in her voice, sorrow she had never been able to feel before. "Is it too late," she asked quietly, "to know them, to be a mother even now?" Ho took her hand gently. "It is never too late to love." The next day, the Queen summoned her descendants to the palace. Hundreds of them came, spanning generations. They stood in the great hall, confused and uncertain, looking at the ancient woman who was their ancestor but had never been their family. The Queen looked at them all, and for the first time she saw them, not as products of genetic continuation but as her children, her legacy of life. "I do not know any of you," she said, her voice trembling. "That is my greatest failure, not the wars I fought, not the decisions I made, but the love I never gave." She stepped down from her throne and walked among them. "I cannot change the past, but I can change the present, and I want." She paused, searching for words she had never used before. "I want to know you. I want to be your family if you will have me." For a long moment, no one moved. Then a young, barely a century old, stepped forward. She was the Queen's great-great-great-granddaughter, though they had never spoken. "I would like that," she said softly. And slowly, one by one, others stepped forward too. The changes spread beyond the palace. Throughout the Empire began to experiment with feeling. Some were frightened by it and retreated back into logic, but many embraced it, discovering parts of themselves they never knew existed. Art began to appear. At first it was simple, crude drawings on walls, clumsy melodies played on makeshift instruments, but it was real, it was expression, it was life. Families formed, began to stay together to raise their children themselves, to build connections based on love rather than efficiency. It was messy and complicated and nothing like the orderly society they had known, but it was also beautiful. Aura became one of Ho's closest friends. She spent hours with him every day, learning, questioning, growing. Her transformation was remarkable. The cold, logical scholar had become someone warm and curious, full of wonder at the world she was discovering. "I feel like I was blind my whole life," she told Ho one evening, "and now I can finally see." But not everyone welcomed the changes. Commander continued to resist, though his opposition grew quieter as the tide of emotion swept through the empire. He watched from the shadows, waiting for the moment when feelings would prove to be the weakness he had always believed them to be. That moment came when news arrived from beyond the borders. Other galactic powers were watching what was happening. They had been feared for because of their cold efficiency, their ruthless logic. Now rumors spread that they were becoming soft, weak, vulnerable. The Dominion, a rival empire that had always feared saw an opportunity. They began massing ships along the border, testing defenses, probing for weakness. Brought the news to the Queen himself. "You see," he said, barely hiding his satisfaction, "this is what emotion brings. Our enemies smell weakness. They will attack, and we are no longer strong enough to stop them." The Queen looked at him calmly. She was no longer the same ruler she had been. Emotion had changed her, but it had not made her weak. "You are wrong," she said quietly. "You think feeling makes us weak, but you have forgotten something important." "What is that?" The Queen smiled, and there was steel in that smile alongside the warmth. "Love does not just make us soft. It gives us something to fight for, something to protect. Before, we fought because it was logical. Now, we will fight because we care. And there is no force in the galaxy more dangerous than someone fighting for what they love." She turned to Ho, who had been listening nearby. "Tell me, teacher, in your history, when did humans fight hardest? When they were cold and logical, or when they were defending something they loved?" Ho thought of all the stories he knew, of parents protecting children, of soldiers defending their homes, of ordinary people becoming heroes because someone they loved was in danger. "When we love," he answered, "we become capable of things we never imagined. We find strength we never knew we had." The Queen nodded. "Then let the come. They will learn that they have not grown weak. We have simply remembered why strength matters." She looked at, and for a moment, something like pity crossed her face. "You fear emotion because you think it makes you vulnerable. But the truth is, you are already vulnerable. You just cannot admit it, because to admit it would require feeling. And feeling is what you fear most." Said nothing, but the crack in his heart grew a little wider. That night Ho stood with the Queen on a balcony overlooking the Silver City. Lights had begun to appear in windows, something that had never happened before. People were staying awake, talking, being together. "You have changed everything," the Queen said. "No," Ho replied. "I just reminded you of what you already had. The change came from within." The Queen held up the pressed flower. It was old and fragile now, but she still treasured it above all her other possessions. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do humans endure? You live such short lives, you feel so much pain. How do you not despair?" Ho looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, his home, his mother's garden, everything he had left behind. "Because we love," he said simply, "and love makes even a short life feel infinite." The Queen considered these words for a long time. Then she did something she had never done before. She reached out and hugged him. It was awkward and uncertain, the embrace of someone who had never hugged anyone in 8 centuries. But it was real, and it was full of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing us back to life." The Dominion attacked 3 weeks later. Their fleet crossed the border in the night, 1,000 warships strong. They had expected to find a weakened empire, distracted by unfamiliar emotions, confused and disorganized. They expected an easy victory. They were wrong. The fleet met them at the edge of the system. Commander led the defense, because despite his doubts, he was still the Empire's greatest military mind. But something had changed in him over the past weeks, something he could not ignore. As the battle began, he found himself thinking not just about strategy, but about the people he was protecting. The young who were just learning to feel, the families that had just begun to form, the future that was just beginning to bloom. For the first time in his long life, was not fighting because it was logical. He was fighting because he cared. And it made all the difference. The fleet fought with a ferocity they had never seen. Ships that would normally retreat when damaged instead pressed forward. Crews that would normally calculate the odds and withdraw instead refused to give ground. They were not fighting as machines. They were fighting as people who had something to lose. The battle lasted 3 days. When it was over, the fleet was scattered and broken. They fled back across the border, and they never threatened the Empire again. Commander returned to the palace as a hero. But when he knelt before the Queen, there were tears in his eyes, tears he did not try to hide. "I understand now," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You were right. Feeling does not make us weak. It makes us alive. And I would rather die fighting for something I love than live forever as a machine." The Queen stepped down from her throne and raised him to his feet. She looked at him with eyes full of warmth and understanding. "Welcome back, old friend," she said. "We have missed you." News of the victory spread across the galaxy. The other empires watched in amazement as the not only survived their transformation, but emerged stronger than before. A species that had been feared for their cold brutality was now respected for something entirely different. They had found their souls, and they were not afraid to fight for them. 1 year after Ho first arrived on the Queen summoned the leaders of every major galactic power to her palace. It was the largest gathering of species in history. Hundreds of delegations filled the Great Hall, watching with curiosity as the ancient queen took her place on the throne. But this time she did not sit. She stood, and in her hands she held the pressed flower that had started everything. For she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "We believed that emotion was weakness. We removed it from ourselves. We became cold, efficient, powerful, and we were feared." She paused, looking out at the assembled faces. But fear is not respect. Power without purpose is emptiness. We had everything and we had nothing. She held up the flower. 1 year ago, a human from a small planet called Earth came to my court. He had no power, no technology, nothing of value by any standard we recognized. But he brought me this. A simple flower, pressed and preserved, given with love. Her voice trembled slightly, but she did not stop. And in that moment, I felt something I had not felt in 800 years. I felt alive. I remembered what it was like to care about something beyond logic, to find meaning in beauty, to love. She looked at Ho, who stood among the human delegation with tears streaming down his face. "Humanity is young, you are small, you are fragile. By every measure we traditionally value, you are insignificant," she smiled. "And yet you carry something the oldest empires had forgotten. You carry the knowledge that life is not about power or efficiency or survival. It is about connection, about meaning, about love." She stepped down from her throne and walked to where Ho stood. Before the entire galaxy, she bowed to him. "On behalf of the Empire," she said, "I thank you. You have given us back our souls." The hall erupted in murmurs, ancient empires whispering to each other, species that had never spoken exchanging glances. Something was shifting in the galaxy, something profound. After the ceremony, a formal alliance was announced between the Empire and Earth. But it was not like other alliances. It was not based on trade or military need. It was based on friendship, on gratitude, on love. Ho prepared to return to Earth. His work here was done. They were changing on their own now, rediscovering emotions and art and family and meaning. They no longer needed a teacher. They just needed time. On his last day, the Queen came to see him off. With her were Aura, Commander, and dozens of others who had become his friends over the past year. "Must you go?" the Queen asked. There was sadness in her voice, but also acceptance. "I must," Ho said. "I have a mother waiting for me, a home that misses me, but I will never forget what happened here, and I will carry all of you in my heart forever." Aura stepped forward. She had changed so much since they first met. She was no longer the cold, logical scholar. She was warm and alive and full of wonder. "I have something for you," she said. She held out a small box, just like the one Ho had brought from Earth. He opened it, and inside was a flower. Not pressed, but freshly picked from the first garden they had planted since reclaiming their emotions. It was silver and blue, delicate and beautiful. "We grow flowers now," Aura said, her eyes shining, "because of you." Ho held the flower gently. Tears filled his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you all." He boarded the ship and watched through the window as they grew smaller and smaller. The journey back to Earth would take months, but that was okay. He had time. When he finally arrived home, it was spring. The cherry blossoms were falling like pink snow. His mother was waiting for him in their small house, the same house where he had grown up. She hugged him for a long time without saying anything. When she finally pulled back, there were tears on both their faces. "You did it," she said quietly. "You changed the galaxy." Ho shook his head. "I just reminded them of something they forgot. The rest they did themselves." His mother smiled. "That is the most powerful kind of change." Years passed. The alliance between humanity and the grew stronger. Ships became a common sight in Earth's sky, bringing gifts and knowledge and friendship. And in return, humans taught them more about what it meant to feel. Art galleries opened on the, filled with paintings and sculptures and creations that would have been unimaginable a few years before. Concert halls played music that made audiences weep with joy. Families walked through parks, laughing and talking and being together. And in every home, there was a tradition that had been borrowed from Earth. They grew flowers. In the palace, Queen kept a special room. It was filled with flowers of every color and shape, from every world in the empire. But in the center, displayed in a case of crystal, was the original, the press that Ho had given her all those years ago. She visited that room every day, even as the centuries continued to pass. And every time she looked at that small, fragile, precious flower, she remembered. She remembered a simple human who had changed everything. She remembered that the greatest gift is not power or technology. It is love. And sometimes, the smallest gesture can awaken the largest heart. The end.